Hey College Math, here is our first video for chapter 1, which we're gonna begin this year by looking at some statistics. This will be the first part of our study of statistics. And then in 1.1, we're just gonna cover the basics, kind of defining all of the different terms we're gonna see that kind of make up a statistical study, and then get more in depth as we kind of get through the rest of the chapter, okay? So our objectives are to identify the variable, population, and sample from a statistical scenario and describe different types of variables, okay? So probably be a good thing to first talk about, what is statistics, okay? We kind of probably have heard that word before in our lives, but maybe we don't know kind of like the actual definition behind it. Kind of just a shorthand way to think about statistics is that it's the study of data. Okay, and then pretty much what we're doing is we are gathering. So we gather, analyze, oops, can't spell today. There we go. Gather, analyze, and draw conclusions. Okay, that's what we're doing with the data that we're gathering. And data is just measurements that we gather from either objects or individuals from the study that we're conducting. Okay, so that's kind of like a quick little definition or quick idea behind statistics. Okay, we're studying people or objects to kind of draw conclusions about those people or objects, right? And so the different parts of a study are here with these three definitions, okay? I will kind of give you a disclaimer for this whole chapter. We are going to do a decent amount of writing, okay? It won't really feel like math for a chapter, but I promise you this is what we study in math. And in chapter 2, we're going to get into the numerical side of statistics, okay? So just bear with me for a chapter and we'll get there. So here's our first definition: variable. It's a characteristic measured from an object or an individual. Okay, so that's kind of what the variable of a study will be, just whatever we're looking at from these objects or individuals that we're studying. The population of a statistical study is the entire group of objects or individuals that we're studying, okay, that we want to draw conclusions about. This is what I want to say about this entire group of people or this entire group of things, etc. And then a sample is a subset of objects or individuals taken from the population. So I have this big thing called the population. Okay, that's the entire group. And I might kind of pick little pieces of my population, okay, to be my sample, okay? It doesn't have to be the entire population, and it hardly ever is, because sometimes the population is way too big. We're going to talk a lot about that in 1.2, okay? So those are kind of the three basic pieces of a study. You definitely need these three things, among other things, right? But those are kind of like the basic, the base of a statistical study. So let's go ahead and do an example where we can identify the variable, population, and sample in different situations, okay? So here we have a researcher who wants to determine the length of the life cycle of a bark beetle. To do this, he breeds 1,000 bark beetles and need a space there, bark beetles, and measures the length of time from birth to death for each beetle, okay? So that's our situation. Whenever we have, I know it's a lot of writing, but since you can refer back to your notes on your test, you're definitely gonna wanna copy these down. I know they can be a little lengthy, I apologize, but it'll be okay. So if we look at this situation, let's start with the variable. Okay, what is it about these bark beetles, which is what we were studying? What is it about these bark beetles that we care, or that this researcher cares about? Okay, what is it about these bark beetles that this researcher cares about? It's the length of the life cycle. Okay, length of life cycle of a bark beetle. Okay, notice that it's not the bark beetle itself. Okay, it's something about the bark beetle. We're never gonna have the object or the individuals be the main part of the variable. It's always something about the object or individual, right? In this case, the length of the life cycle. Okay, now let's talk population. What is the population? What is the group or a group of individuals or objects that this researcher is studying? Okay, in this case, it's bark beetles. All right, now we want to be specific. Okay, in this case, it's all bark beetles. Okay, not specific bark beetles, not, not this 1,000 bark beetles, because of course there's lots of bark beetles out there. It's all bark beetles is our population. And then our sample, in this case, is going to be the 1,000 bark beetles. Okay, not just the number. Okay, not just 1,000, it's 1,000 bark beetles. Okay, we want to be specific because sometimes the sample does change a little bit in terms of like, this is what I picked from the population. It might not be completely descriptive of the population, right? So you always want to make sure you're describing all three of these, not just kind of giving me one word, but giving me as much as you can from the situation, from the scenario, okay? Let's look at B. The Pew Research Center asked 1,000 mothers in the United States what their highest attained education level. What their highest education level was. Okay, not on it. Oh. Technical difficulties. Please don't mind me. Okay, that's as good as it's gonna get. Okay, so part B. All right, so let's start with the variable. All right, what is it about these mothers that we care about? It's their highest attained education level. So highest attained education level. Of US mothers. Okay. Population. Okay, make sure you be as descriptive as possible from using the information given from the scenario. It's not all mothers, because that implies all mothers that exist, which means around the world, right? It's only the mothers in the United States. So I want to make sure I put that in my population. All mothers in the US, okay? And then the sample is, in this case, the 1,000 mothers. All right. Just make sure you include those small details whenever possible. Okay, so now let's talk variables, right? We're gonna start with the two main types of variables. Okay, we have quantitative. Another word for quantitative is numerical. And then qualitative, another way to call those is categorical. Okay, so let's talk about what those look like. Are quantitative or numerical variables? They're variables that represent a measurable quantity. Okay, it's something that I can measure with numbers, okay? So here are a few examples. Height, I can measure that with a number. Weight, number of cats owned, right? Whenever someone asks you what the height is, what the weight is, what the number of cats owned is, you're gonna respond with a number, okay? The difference between that and qualitative or categorical variables, they represent a characteristic or a quality, right? So something about the object or individual that's not measured with numbers. You cannot measure a qualitative variable with a number, right? For example, if I asked you what your hair color was, you wouldn't say a number. You would tell me like either brown or blonde, whatever your hair color might be, right? Same thing with college major, and same thing with favorite Beyonce album. Okay, you wouldn't say a number unless it's her album 4. I'm sorry, that was a corny joke, but I had to, right? That's a bad example. But in general, you would respond with something that's not a number. Okay, that's what a qualitative or categorical variable is. Okay, now with this, there are two types of quantitative or numerical variables, okay? Discrete and continuous. And so if you're kind of already having trouble keeping track of these variables, here's a little, if you like to think diagrams or pictures, here's kind of a small one that might help you, okay? I have variables. There are two main types, right? There are my quantitative variables and my qualitative variables. Okay, those are the two main types. And then with these new ones, I can split the quantitative ones up into either discrete or continuous, okay? And it's only the quantitative variables that I can split up into either discrete or continuous. Qualitative variables are just qualitative variables, okay? So maybe this tree kind of helps you a little bit in organizing these different types of variables. Okay, so what do we mean by discrete or continuous? Well, discrete variables Those are quantitative variables that can take on only specific values in a given range, okay? So what that means is that if I give you any range, the range doesn't matter. In that range, you're only allowed to pick specific numbers. You can't pick all of them, okay? Whereas continuous, no matter what range I give you, you can pick whatever you want, okay? So some quick examples here, okay? One example of discrete variable from the ones we talked about here is number of cats owned. Number of cats owned. Why? Because, all right, I can own as many cats as I want. There probably is a limit because then it'd get really expensive, but I can't own 1.5 cats. That doesn't make sense, right? And so that's why number of cats owned would be a discrete variable, because it can't take on whatever number it wants to, right? If this were a continuous variable, I would be able to say, oh yeah, I have 2.5 cats, but we can't say that, right? Whereas continuous, an example of this would be like height, okay? Because I can say that I'm 5'11", but I can also say I'm 5'11 and a half, or 5'11.2, 5'11.3, 5'11.367, right? There's always kind of a degree of uncertainty because when we measure something, we usually just kind of round it, right? Or we kind of, choose the nicest number possible. Or think of like a scale when you weigh yourself, okay? If you think of an electronic scale, okay, some scales only do the whole numbers, but there are other scales that also do the decimals, and the decimal can actually go on forever, right? So height and weight are examples where they can take on whatever number they want, all right? Okay, so now let's do one last example where we kind of identify different types of variables. So we're gonna look at these variables here and determine whether they are quantitative or qualitative. Determine whether each variable is, if it is quantitative, tell whether it is discrete or continuous, okay? So start with A, height of NAU students. We kind of just talked about this, right? So this is quantitative because height, whenever you ask someone their height, they respond with a number. And then it's continuous because it can be any number in that specified range. Okay, it can be, and if we measure in like centimeters, someone can be 180 centimeters, another person can be 172.582 centimeters, right? Whatever number is possible. Okay, B, opinion about the president. When you ask someone this, they're not going to respond with a number. They're going to respond with a quality or a characteristic. So this one is a qualitative. Qualitative or categorical, just like here, this is quantitative or numerical. Okay, you can use either word in your practice and then on the test when we get there, on the checkpoint, sorry. As long as you know which one goes with which, right? Okay, see number of stray cats in downtown Phoenix. This is quantitative because you would respond with a number. And then this is discrete because it cannot be whatever number it wants to be. Okay, it can't, within a range. It can't be 2.67 because that doesn't make sense, right? And then lastly, letter grade of students in AP Physics. Okay, here you would respond with a letter. You wouldn't respond with a number. So this would be qualitative as well. I don't know why I changed color for the last question. Okay, so that was section 1.1. Okay, we covered the three main pieces of a statistical study: variable, population, sample. And then we talked about different types of variables, and I'll kind of come back up here and show you that little mini diagram. Okay, I do recommend drawing this if you are kind of lost with these types of variables, or you kind of have trouble keeping track of them. And this also kind of helps to remind you that there are no discrete or continuous qualitative variables, right? Because qualitative is not a number. Okay, hopefully this sounds good, y'all. Make sure you're asking your questions in class, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good rest of your day.